You know how sometimes you learn a historical fact and immediately think, there's no way that's real? Well, the ancient world was full of those. Romans washed their clothes in urine. Ancient Egyptians used crocodile dung as contraception. People drank gladiator blood. And somewhere along the way, a doctor decided that putting a dead mouse on your tooth was a perfectly reasonable medical treatment. And somehow, people listened to him. So today, we're looking at 10 completely bizarre things ancient people actually did. And the further we go, the worse this gets. 10. Romans washed their clothes in urine. Let's start with something that sounds like a joke. The Romans washed their clothes in urine. Before you start wondering what was wrong with them, there was actually a reason. Urine contains ammonia, which can help break down grease and dirt, and the Romans figured this out without having any idea what ammonia was. Roman laundry workers, known as fullers, collected urine in containers placed around the city. Then they diluted it with water and used it to clean clothing. And apparently, the most effective way to wash a toga was to stomp around in a giant vat of pee, which means that somewhere in ancient Rome, there was a guy whose entire career was basically professional urine stomper, and it wasn't some tiny operation either. The Romans collected enough urine that Emperor Vespasian became associated with taxing its collection. So, yes, ancient Rome had a urine economy. But if you think that's disgusting, wait until you hear what the Egyptians were putting down there. 9. They used crocodile dung as birth control. Ancient Egyptians had a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of reproduction, but some of their contraceptive methods were less sophisticated. One ancient Egyptian medical text contains a recipe involving crocodile dung mixed with other ingredients and used as a contraceptive. Now, before we judge them too harshly, the important thing is that ancient people were genuinely trying to figure out how to control fertility. They didn't have modern birth control, they didn't understand hormones, they didn't have pharmacies, so they experimented with whatever substances they thought might work. Unfortunately, one of those substances was apparently crocodile. And this raises an important question. Who was the first person to discover this? Because I don't think there was a scientific study. There probably wasn't a control group. There definitely wasn't a guy in a lab coat saying, "Excellent, let's publish the results." Someone just had a very weird idea, and somehow it made it into a medical text. But at least they weren't putting crocodiles in their mouths, unlike number 8. 8. They used the dead mice for toothaches. If you had a toothache in the ancient world, you had a problem. Today you go to a dentist, you get an x-ray, you get anesthetic, maybe you get antibiotics. In ancient Egypt and other ancient medical traditions, treatment could be much more creative. Some historical medical recipes call for dead mice or mouse-based preparations to be used for tooth problems. And yes, I know what you're thinking. Surely the mouse was at least alive. No, dead mouse. For your tooth. Imagine walking into an ancient doctor's office. "My tooth hurts." Don't worry, the doctor reaches under his desk. You see a mouse, and you're thinking, "Please tell me that's not for me." He puts it on your tooth, and you're just sitting there thinking, "I should have stayed home." The ancient world was full of treatments like this because medicine was based heavily on observation, tradition, religion, and trial and error. And occasionally, the answer was a mouse, but apparently, dead rodents weren't the only disgusting thing ancient doctors were willing to prescribe. 7. They used animal dung as medicine. Here we go again. Ancient medicine had a very simple philosophy sometimes. If it exists, someone can probably put it in a medicine, and that included animal dung. Ancient medical recipes from Egypt and other cultures contain treatments involving animal waste. Different substances were believed to have different medicinal properties, and some of these recipes were applied directly to wounds or used as part of other treatments. Now, here's the frustrating part. Sometimes ancient medicine was actually onto something. Honey, for example, really can have properties that make it useful for wound care. Certain plants really do contain active medicinal compounds, but then someone looks at a pile of animal poop and thinks, yeah, that will probably help too. And this is where ancient medicine gets fascinating, because it wasn't simply stupid. These people were trying to understand the world without modern chemistry, microbiology, or clinical trials. They were experimenting. They just didn't have Google to tell them when they were making a terrible decision. And speaking of terrible decisions, the Romans had an interesting idea for dealing with one particular medical condition. 6. They drank gladiator blood. Ancient Rome loved gladiators. They were celebrities, they were athletes, they were fighters, and apparently their blood was considered medically useful. Some Roman writers describe people collecting the blood of freshly killed gladiators and drinking it as a treatment for epilepsy. The idea was that the blood of someone who had just demonstrated incredible strength might somehow transfer that strength to the person drinking it, which is one way to think about medicine. Imagine being a Roman with epilepsy. Your doctor gives you two options. Option 1, here's some medicine. Option 2, there's a gladiator fighting tonight. And you're thinking, why does option 2 sound worse? But this belief wasn't necessarily unique to gladiators. Blood and body parts could be associated with supernatural or medicinal properties in various ancient cultures. And that brings us to something even stranger, because apparently the Romans didn't just consume bizarre substances, they also used some incredibly strange ingredients in their everyday products. 5. They used lead to sweeten their food. This one is particularly disturbing because it actually worked. Romans sometimes concentrated grape juice by boiling it down in vessels that could contain lead. The result was a sweet syrup that could be used in food and drink. The Romans called products like this defrutum or sapa, depending on the preparation. And here's the problem: lead is toxic. They obviously didn't understand lead poisoning the way we do today, so they were essentially making their food sweeter with a substance that could slowly poison them. And it gets worse. Lead compounds could give food a pleasant sweetness. So from their perspective, it wasn't just useful, it was delicious. Imagine discovering that the secret ingredient to making wine taste better is extremely poisonous metal, and somehow everyone goes, perfect. This is one of those moments where ancient history stops being funny for a second, because it shows how dangerous everyday life could be when you didn't understand chemistry. But number 4 is somehow even more bizarre, because ancient people found a way to make their deodorant absolutely disgusting. 4. They used strange substances to fight body odor. Ancient people obviously had body odor. They didn't have modern deodorant. They didn't have Axe. Honestly, maybe that's a good thing, but they still tried to deal with the problem. Different cultures used perfumes, oils, powders, and other substances to smell better. The ancient Egyptians in particular were famous for perfumes and scented oils, but some ancient recipes could get pretty strange. People experimented with mixtures of animal fats, resins, herbs, and other ingredients. Basically, if it smelled strong enough, they hoped it would overpower whatever was underneath. But this actually reveals something interesting. Ancient people cared a lot about smell. Your scent could communicate cleanliness, wealth, status, and social position. So perfume wasn't just cosmetic, it was social armor. And speaking of social status, number 3 involves something ancient people did to their bodies that looks absolutely insane today. 3. They deliberately blackened their teeth. Today, if you look in the mirror and realize your teeth are turning black, you're probably calling a dentist. In some ancient cultures, however, deliberately darkening the teeth could actually be considered attractive. In parts of Southeast Asia and elsewhere, traditions of tooth blackening existed for centuries. People used different mixtures to stain their teeth dark. And unlike our modern obsession with perfectly white teeth, blackened teeth could be associated with beauty, maturity, and status, which is a good reminder that beauty standards are completely insane. And humans weren't finished modifying their bodies, because number 2 involves something that sounds like it came straight out of a horror movie. 2. They put things under their skin on purpose. Ancient people practiced all kinds of body modification: tattoos, scarification, piercing, stretching, and other permanent alterations. But one of the strangest examples comes from ancient medical and cosmetic practices where objects or substances could be inserted into or placed beneath the skin. The reasons varied. Sometimes it was decoration, sometimes medicine, sometimes ritual, and sometimes it was connected to identity or status. The important thing is that body modification wasn't viewed as something bizarre, it was part of culture, which is something we forget when looking at ancient people. We see something strange and think, why would anyone do that? But someone living in that society might look at us and wonder why we spend hours every morning putting chemicals on our faces before going to work. Culture decides what's normal, and that brings us to number 1. And honestly, this might be the strangest one of all. 1. They used human urine for almost everything. Yes, we're back to urine. Because the Romans didn't just use it for laundry, they found a disturbing number of uses for it. It could be used in cleaning, in processing materials, in certain tanning and textile processes, and urine was valuable enough that people collected it and sold it. Why? Because once again, ammonia. The Romans didn't understand the chemistry behind it, they just knew. This disgusting liquid seems to be useful, and honestly, that's basically how a lot of ancient technology worked. They didn't always know why something worked, they just knew that it did, and that's what makes these stories so fascinating. Ancient people could be incredibly sophisticated and incredibly weird at exactly the same time. They built enormous cities, they developed mathematics, they studied astronomy, they created complex machines. And then someone would walk into a laundry carrying a bucket of urine. They didn't have modern science, they didn't have antibiotics, they didn't have supermarkets, they didn't have deodorant, they didn't even have a reliable way of knowing whether the guy selling them medicine had any idea what he was doing. But they experimented, they observed, they tried things. Sometimes they discovered something genuinely brilliant, and sometimes they put a dead mouse on someone's tooth. That's what makes ancient history so entertaining, because when you strip away the pyramids, the emperors, and the giant monuments, you find ordinary people. People who had headaches, people who wanted clean clothes, people who wanted to smell better, people who didn't want children, people who wanted their teeth to look good. Basically, people just trying to survive. They just had some absolutely insane ways of doing it.